Okay, so we finished up Africa and why the Europeans wanted to gain control over it for the natural resources, for the raw materials, for the markets, and then they also set their sights eastward as well. So the Middle East was really important, and you can tell by the copious dollar sign icons that it was all about money, and it wasn't about oil yet. This is the late 19th century, so oil was not an issue. There wasn't it wasn't being used to power cars or naval ships or airplanes. That starts at the early 20th century, but in the beginning it's all about location. And if you control the Mideast, and this is why the Mideast has been important since the start of civilization, it's a cultural and economic crossroads. If you were looking at a map, as I'm staring at the big wall map right now, you would see it's just in the heart of, in the center of everything. It's in the middle of the East if you are in Western Europe, or of course, as we've been referencing it recently, it's Southwest Asia. So if you control the Middle East, you can control the end of the Silk Road. You can control trade between the Indian subcontinent and the Arabian Peninsula. The Zenj coast trades with the Mideast. It's really a economic stronghold for sure. So it's about making money, and that's one thing that we as Westerners, actually most people really love. Okay, so if you go back to the days of the old imperialism, you would notice that you have to sail around the entire continent of Africa to get to South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia, and it's a very tumultuous journey. If you remember the wind patterns along the Cape of Good Hope, it's a lot of, ships were lost, investments could be lost. Columbus does try to sail westward to try to find a faster route to Asia, and then, he bumps into the Americas, the Columbian Exchange begins, and that starts a whole other era of history. Magellan sails around Cape Horn, again looking for a route to Asia. Of course, we know that circumnavigation is very long, and it's faster to go around Africa. But wouldn't it be cool if this narrow piece of land right here, what if that was a canal? And it connected to the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, and that's the Suez Canal. So it's a very interesting story. The French, a French company was building it, and it was a massive endeavor, absolutely massive endeavor. Now, of course, the French company owned, and was building it, but they were using Egyptian labor. Thousands of people are going to die digging this canal because it was hand dug. This wasn't dug by machines or barges or anything like that. This was a hand dug canal. And as you can see, it's narrow. There are parts where there are pull-off stations, like up here. You can pull off and let traffic pass. This is not an overly wide canal, but it definitely fit the bill. And it was completed in 1869, but it basically bankrupted the French company that built it. And then France didn't have the money to cover the debt, so the Brits offered to buy it. So in 1875, the Brits purchased it, and which makes sense because they have influence and control over Egypt at the time. And the Brits will control the Suez Canal up until 1956, I believe. It's 54, 56 that the Suez Canal is nationalized by Egypt. And we'll talk about that when we do Africa, 1945 to the present. So the Suez Canal, it takes off. Instead of having to sail around the entire continent, you can just go through the, much easier to traverse Mediterranean Sea, cut through the Suez Canal to the Red Sea, and then bam, you're in the Arabian Sea, Indian Ocean, and it just makes life so much better. And of course, the Brits wanted control over it because of their interests in South and Southeast Asia. So you may remember from your summer reading, or not, so you should go back and relook at this, that the Mughals were in control of South Asia at the start of the 1700s. Of course, we call that the 18th century. And by the mid-1700s, they were really on their decline, for sure. The Mughals were the Muslims in India. That's where, the Taj Mahal was built and all that stuff. So when we say the Europeans were obsessed with the spice trade, that's not an understatement in any sense of the term. They went crazy for all things South Asian, Southeast Asian, and East Asian for sure. The Portuguese got there first in 1498. Remember Vasco da Gama, 3,000% profit, massive trade success. and the Portuguese established a trading port here onto Goa, right there. So as they move forward, the Brits start to become more dominant. We know the Portuguese lose their influence and the British increase their influence. And they built themselves an empire on which the sun never set. And we look at this map, all the things in that pink color were the British Empire. So, of course, the sun never set on it. So, again, the duality meaning of it is that the sun will always be like up at certain parts of it, and also that the British Empire will last forever. Of course, we know that's not true. Every single empire has risen and fallen. There has been no success story that would last forever. It's just not possible. So the British Empire, though, had a couple different kinds of colonies. You had tropical dependencies and white dominions, and I'll explain that further here. So the tropical dependencies were, Egypt and South Africa, primarily, as well as other parts of Africa, but Egypt and South Africa were the big ones. India, coastal China. They didn't want all of China, but we'll get into that after Thanksgiving break. The Caribbean islands, especially Jamaica, and then parts of Southeast Asia, which Mrs. Villegas goes over, and areas of the Mideast, which we will talk more in detail as we do World War I. So the white dominions were Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And if you think about the tropical dependencies, yes, you have the Brits going and settling there, but it wasn't so much of a takeover as if you think of Canada and Australia. Like, the indigenous population of Canada is not really, in existence anymore. The Aborigines of Australia, not a huge influence in Australia anymore. I can't remember what the indigenous population of New Zealand is. I know people from New Zealand are called Kiwis, but I can't remember past that. Australia and New Zealand, of course, were penal colonies. That's where the Brits would send convicts and their families. They would go and have to do hard labor in Australia, and they ended up just settling there. But now Australia is, lovely, thriving country. So this is not, yes, these colonies made a lot of money for the Brits, but it also cost them a lot of money. This is called the burden of the empire, because you have to have schools and hospitals, railroads for, yes, the people that already live there, but for your settlers, for the people moving there. There's an expectation of living that British citizens expect. And, yes, the cultures already living there were westernized, and they got to go to these schools or forced to go to Western schools, but they did get access to increased, medical care and things like that. Railroads, of course, were built not for the convenience of the peoples already living there, but to transport the goods and materials that the Brits needed from the interior to the coast. So a lot of the investments done in these colonies were, of course, to make the corporations there a lot of money. So, this is a very popular cartoon where you have England just controlling all different parts of the world, and it doesn't shed Britain in a positive light. I mean, it's monstrous. It's like all those, tentacles and arms, and while, yes, he is wearing a top hat and, appears very well fed and civilized, it is like a monster. It's taking over and having influence in these places, and it's not always a positive impact, as we will later know. Okay, so the Brits, they set their sights on India, and it's important that you understand that the British East India Company was the main force behind the Brits being in South Asia. Yes, Robert Clive, who is a general, and he leads a series of battles against Indians, and he wins. He's very successful. He defeats them in the Battle of Plessy in 1757. But you have to understand, this is all done to further the advance of the British East India Company. The British government was not in control as of yet. So, of course, the British East India Company was very involved with the politics of India at the time. So what happens is they establish these presence. They start to influence politics. They established different Rajas across the way, and by the way, BEIC is the British East India Company. You know, they were all about gaining wealth and power. Like this is all about money. So the corrupt smugglers within the British East India Company were called nabobs. And you can compare them to like it says, the carpetbaggers in U.S. history. If you remember, the carpetbaggers were the people from the north that went into the south after the Civil War to take advantage of the situation. And that's what these nabobs were. They went in and totally exploited India and its people, its resources to make money. But, I mean, that was their goal. So eventually the British government has to come in, and they end up actually fully colonizing India to stop this massive exploitation of the nabobs and to kind of squash these native rebellions. Of course, the Brits aren't really that much better, but what are you going to do? So General Charles Cornwallis is sent by Parliament to come and really establish that permanent government presence and to end corruption. So he's a famous guy. You know, he did the whole Yorktown surrendering thing, and you know, he's a pretty high up in the British military. So he's, you know, it's not just having influence now, they're conquering the sucker. They want to get control over all of South Asia. So he gets these presidencies, right? These three strongholds: Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta. So what they do is this good old divide and conquer strategy, you know, like united we stand, divided we fall. So they put enemy against enemy. Remember, if you even remember back with the Guptas, India was not this unified state. It was broken up into different provinces. You have a lot of regionalism going on, and that is still there, like, even throughout the Mughals, and as you move forward, those regional provinces still exist. So what the Brits do is what they do best. They pit, you know, neighbor against neighbor, and they get the help of the locals, and before you know it, the Brits are in charge of India, and they have control of it for nearly 150 years. Oh my goodness, and the tensions between the Hindus and the Muslims, they totally, absolutely play off of that. And politically, economically, militarily, advance and move forward just by exploiting the already large tensions of the area. So India is the British jewel and the British crown, that's what it's called. And it just, I mean, you name it, it probably came out of India. Cotton for sure, spices, opium, which is what that picture is in the bottom right. Those are poppies. Opium comes from poppy flowers, poppy seeds. They also had precious metals as well. And then they were a guaranteed market, right? This is mercantilism, mercantile economics. So they had to buy from Britain. So they would grow the cotton in India, ship the cotton back, where it'd be manufactured into clothing and other textiles, and they would ship it back and receive it and be purchased within the Indian subcontinent. And then the Brits, though, I mean, they invested. They really invested their money into building their railroads and trying to, quote unquote, civilizing the subcontinent. And to get the Brits out was not going to be an easy task. Gandhi does it, and he does it in a way that's brand new for fighting a colonial power, which we will talk about when we do South Asia, 1945 to the present. Maybe a little bit before. Actually, I think we do South Asia 1920 to the present. That's how I organize it. So again, mercantile economy. This is not a brand new information slide, but England will get the raw materials from India, ship it back through the Suez Canal. That's what the Brits control. It goes back to England, where it's manufactured, and then it gets sent back to India, where they have to purchase the finished goods. And this is mercantile economics quintessential. Okay, I'm going to start with this slide on the next presentation.